MP Chambers we're in second round, members, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the work you do on behalf of Canadians. Appreciate you coming to committee. When you were here about 6 months ago, we talked about fiscal and monetary policy, and I believe you said that if the rate of growth in government spending could be at or below 2%, we'd be good. But spending growth next year for the federal government is 6.7%. So I'm not as steeped in economics, and I always learn something from you every time that you're here. I'm trying to understand how that is not inflationary pressure.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So first of all, when we're looking at, so that 2% number I gave you is real government spending on goods and services. It's not nominal spending. It's not public account spending. It's the national accounts measure of government spending on goods and services. So those numbers aren't directly comparable. What I can say in terms of our projection, so why do if governments are not increasing their deficits and government spending is growing around 2%, potential output, the economy is growing about 2%, so government spending is not adding more to demand than supply is growing. So it's roughly
okay. I'm going to jump in right there if that's okay. So expanding the deficits is expansionary fiscal policy, correct?
Correct.
In the last year and a half, the government has added net, not gross, net new spending of $100 billion to the fiscal framework. That's all deficit financed. Is your testimony that we are no longer in an expansionary fiscal environment?
My testimony is that the fiscal situation, this budget relative to the fall economic statement, the deficit to GDP, the debt to GDP track has not changed significantly. So I don't expect it's going to have a significant macro impact relative to our previous forecast. So in other words, I don't think the federal budget is going to have a big impact on the forecast that we published a few weeks ago.
So would you say now that fiscal and monetary policy are rowing in the same direction?
I would say, overall, coming back to our forecast, the impact, so in most of the provinces tabled their budgets ahead of the NPR. They did increase spending, and it was largely deficit financed. That has increased the contribution to growth from government. So last time I was here, I think I said government spending on goods and services this year was forecast to grow at about 2.25%. That has now moved up to 2.75%. That is somewhat above 2%. So yeah, that is not helpful in trying to get inflation down. It is built into our forecast. We still get inflation back to the 2% target. It does get there gradually. The final thing I'll say is there are a number of risks to our forecast, and we highlight those in the back. To the extent that the federal government sticks to its fiscal guardrails, the risk on government spending is managed. We see some bigger risk to our inflation forecast coming from geopolitical events. Others have mentioned the housing market. We think those are bigger risks.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I know you mentioned before that we could take a calculator and do it ourselves, but I'd certainly appreciate the bank's model or how it's looking at government spending, because you can understand how it's a little bit confusing. But I'll move on to my last question.
And we can talk to you offline about that.
That's very helpful. But I just have one more question, Governor.
Quite complicated.
All tax increases are not the same with respect to inflation. So I'm trying to think about the capital gains tax, where you pull forward a bunch of transactions that would have happened in future years. And that movement of money, where someone turns an asset into cash, creates a big cash balance in a new person's bank account. That movement of money, is that not an inflationary pressure, even just a little bit?
Well, as I said, we're going to have to go through the budget a little more carefully. There are also, on the spending side, there are a number of new spending initiatives, as you've highlighted. Those will have different types of fiscal multipliers. So, for example, military spending that is mostly buying importing, say, U.S. machinery is not going to have much inflationary impact in Canada.
I'm out of time, but I will look forward to your capital gains.
I'm getting to capital gains. I mean, I think so all is to say, we need to look at the various measures more carefully, and we will do that getting to July. My analysis at this point is very macro. There's more spending going into the economy. The government's tax measures are pulling more money out of the economy. So from a macro perspective, the net effect isn't that big from an inflationary point of view.
It's pulling money out, but money that wasn't going to be brought out anyway because the assets weren't going to be sold. Anyway, that's a bit academic, but maybe we could talk about that offline.
It's taking
Mr.
money
Chair.
out of the
We're good.
private
Yep.
sector into the government.
Thank you. Okay. So thanks, MP Chambers.